Hello, Johnny here, Eurogamer's resident Mordor fancier. I paid a visit to Monolith recently to play a decent chunk of Shadow of War. Some of it's already been revealed, like the new online conquest mode, and there's plenty more I can't talk about just yet, but there were lots of little details I noticed during my hands-on time that I wanted to share today. The little details, after all, are a big part of what makes Shadow of Mordor so special, and there seemed to be no shortage of them in the sequel either. So, without any further ado, here are 19 things I liked about Shadow of War. Some of these will be known to you already, some of them may surprise you. First, the skill tree has been torn up and replanted, and it's looking really good. For one thing, it's laid out in a much more intuitive style. Skills are divided into combat, predator, i.e. stealth, ranged, wraith, mounted, and story, helping you focus on the bits of gameplay you enjoy most. And with lots of little unlockable augmentations on offer, there are loads of things you can pour your skill points into, letting you focus on really well targeted builds. For example, a number of Talion and Celebrimbor's abilities can be tweaked to take on an elemental effect, whether that's poison, fire, or frost. So if you fancy it, you can build yourself a pyromaniacal Talion, setting everything ablaze, or you could go heavy on poison abilities and spread pestilence to your enemies with reckless abandon. Or you can mix and match, depending on your preferences. Particular shout out to the skill that lets you poison grog barrels from afar, and the augmentation that makes orcs explode once they've had a drink. I did that a lot during my playtime, and it was always hilarious. Speaking of orcs, it seems like Monolith has taken the naming convention from Shadow of Mordor and really run with it for the next game. Simply put, there are loads and loads of different enemy types now. To give you an idea, here are just some of the names I encountered. Both the Gut Ripper, Nakra the Obvious, Arhenok the Gorger, Arsaku Limb Ripper, Urbenu the Gluttonous, Pash the Marauder, Prak the Funny One, Gura the Militant, Grisha Ghoul Lover, Gubu Longshot, Norsko the Assassin, Crackhorn the Advisor, Krosh the Cursed, Zog the Eternal, and Flog the Bard. Yes, you heard that name correctly, Flog the Bard. There are now bards in Shadow of War, and they're flipping hilarious. While ordinarily an orc captain will introduce himself by threatening to pull your kidneys out through your mouth, or some other delightful greeting, the bard will sing you a little ditty about how he's, going to pull your kidneys out through your mouth. He'll then try and murder you where you stand using his weapon, which is a lute. I'm really sorry I don't have footage of this to show you, because, quite honestly, words don't do it justice. Now, while you're fighting one of these new orcs, you might also run up against new immunities or weaknesses you hadn't encountered before, as this system has also been tweaked and expanded for Shadow of War. Some of these new traits are really interesting, like Iron Will, which means an orc can't be recruited to join Talion's army. Some of them, meanwhile, are delightfully bizarre, like the trait Enraged by Acrobatics. This one is not only weird, but it's very easy to forget. I was taking on one particular orc captain during a fortress conquest and went to flip over him, remembering all too late he was enraged by acrobatics and whipping him up into a bit of a frenzy. My mistake. Now, of course, with so many traits flying about the place, you're inevitably going to run into one orc that's immune to the exact environmental damage type you spent so long building into Talion's abilities. What's a Frost Talion to do in such a situation, you ask? Well, not to worry, because in Shadow of War you can pause and select entirely different skills and upgrades immediately on the spot. So, if you run into an orc that's immune to frost but critically vulnerable to fire, for example, all you need to do is tweak your skill choices and suddenly you're a perfectly targeted killing machine. Easy. I found it quite useful while playing Shadow of War, though to be honest at times it felt a little like cheating, and I can see why some people might not be keen on this style of play. If you don't like the idea of respeccing during combat, I guess you could just always ignore it, and to be fair, it's not like Talion is short on other ways to slaughter the forces of Mordor, of which one of the newest and most interesting methods is Celebrimbor's Glaive. We first got a glimpse of the glaive during the gameplay reveal earlier this year when Celebrimbor drove it into a fortress gatehouse in order to claim it as his own. The glaive can also be whipped out during combat, however, to pretty devastating effect. You press and hold the light attack button, releasing it earlier for a swifter yet less powerful attack, or holding it down longer for a second charge and a more devastating assault. If you can find the breathing room to charge it in the midst of combat, you can use it to really clean up the place, attacking a few orcs at a time and levelling the playing field a bit. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but get it right and it'll become a vital part of your new arsenal. The glaive also comes in handy during mounted combat, which I'm pleased to say has been greatly revamped. Whereas before, attacking from the back of a Caragor limited you to waggling your sword lamely at your side, they now behave much more like the moves you pull on foot, letting you direct your attacks more fluidly and with greater effect. Good news for anyone who, like me, largely ignored Caragor riding in Shadow of Mordor. Speaking of Caragors actually, invest your skill points wisely and you can summon one at will, pre-dominated and ready to ride. This summon mount ability can be upgraded, allowing you to summon a dire Caragor instead and ride that about the place at the drop of a hat. Or, if you're feeling a bit more adventurous, you can casually summon up a Graug instead. No, really. It's a pretty great ability to pull out in the heat of battle, or just when you fancy getting a lift somewhere. There's a similar version of this ability in which you summon reinforcements. You can conjure up a small group of orcs to help you fight the enemy, for instance, or you can nominate a specific follower from your army as your bodyguard and bring them in instead. So if anyone's been watching our playthrough of Shadow of Mordor over the last few weeks, yes, I will be importing Tor's Giggles and making him my bodyguard the minute I unlock that ability. Once you've summoned something to your side, you can also give it orders, instructing a Caragor to go kill a specific target, for instance. It's pretty handy for creating a distraction or getting rid of an inconveniently placed enemy, and you can even get them to do it without blowing your cover. Speaking of which, while riding a Caragor, you now have the option to sneak about and even pull off stealth skills, which is further proof, as if any were needed, that Talion's grip on what constitutes being inconspicuous is shaky at best. Jumping off a roof and landing on someone is not a stealthy way to murder, Talion. Let's be real here. Although, to be honest, if I'm going to go after Talion for the way he jumps about the place, there are bigger fish to fry in Shadow of War. Upgrading the Wraith section of the skill tree allows you to unlock a double jump. Pressing jump while in midair causes Celebrimbor to flip back up into the air while still going in the direction of travel. It's extremely handy for any long or mistimed jumps, but it can also come in really handy during combat, letting you get around the forces of Mordor with much greater ease. And that's not the end of Talion's mid-air antics either. There's a new bow ability that should be very familiar to anyone who's played The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. You can now use focus and slow down time while falling, letting you pick off a whole bunch of enemies with your elf shot before you even hit the ground. It's super handy. Also extremely handy is the upgrade that allows you to pick up elf shot just by getting close to it. Having Talion grope around for it in the past was, quite frankly, painful, so being able to dash past a bunch of elf shot and have it automatically collected is a breath of fresh air. And if you really didn't like picking up things in Shadow of Mordor, the good news doesn't end there. Picking up items dropped by your enemies is now a lot faster, and get this, you don't have to pick plants at all. That mechanic has been completely removed for Shadow of War. I'm not sure of all the ways to regain health or whether they need to be unlocked, but on the build I was playing, Talion regained health by draining soldiers, which was a much nicer way of doing things. Well, not nicer, obviously, but you know what I mean. One last thing on focus actually while we're at it, you can now click in the left stick and use up your focus in order to sprint or climb faster, which, by comparison, makes the normal run seem painfully slow. Climbing in general has been sped up a fair bit for Shadow of War, actually, but you can still expect to make heavy use of this sprint function while you're tooling about the place. Another one of the more interesting Wraith powers, meanwhile, is an upgrade that lets you basically treat Celebrimbor like a proximity mine. Remember how when you broke the line of sight in Shadow of Mordor, a shadowy outline of Celebrimbor would appear to show your last seen position? Well, now you can leave him there for real, letting him murder the first enemy to come along and investigate the area. It's deliciously wicked, almost to the point of being unfair. You might find yourself hearing about all these new abilities and upgrades in fact, and thinking maybe Talion's starting to sound a bit overpowered. But while it's certainly true he has a lot of new toys to play with, Sauron's army has also been beefed up a bit, mostly with the arrival of the Olog High. It's not news that they're in the game of course, but I had to mention them simply because they're so bloody big, and squaring off against a few of them really does change the landscape of the battles quite a bit. Shadow of War's not shy about chucking them at you either. During one fortress assault, Talion took on an Olog High Overlord, only to find there were 5 more Olog High just hanging out as bodyguards. That's a lot of chunky dudes to take care of, even if you can set them on fire with the greatest of ease. If you find they get the better of you, in fact, you might be interested to learn that the last chance mechanic has been tweaked slightly. Whereas before you had to use the analog stick to pull the button prompt into the middle of the circle before hitting said button, now all you have to do is press the button, no wrangling required. The trick is you have to press the button at a specific moment, so while it is a little easier, there are still plenty of opportunities to mess it up. You'll also be dismayed to hear that the no chance trait, i.e. the one that doesn't let you have a second chance at all, returns for Shadow of War. I'm not sure it's any more prevalent, but I definitely died to it more than once. Happily, if you do find yourself getting downed quite a bit in combat, there's now an icon in the corner showing how many last chances you have left before Talion bites the big one. And weirdly, some enemies will choose not to kill you when they have the chance, deciding instead to deliver a cutting taunt. So there you have it, 19 things I liked in Shadow of War. Lots of little details, a lot of them brand spanking new. One thing I'll be talking about in detail next week is how Shadow of War's endgame differs from Shadow of Mordor. Make sure you're subscribed to Eurogamer so you don't miss it. You can also check out some of our other Shadow of War coverage if you like. There should be some videos on screen now. Thank you very much for watching, and have a lovely day.
Run to your master and give him this message. I come